You think you know the Vikings? Think again. These fierce warriors weren't just about raiding and pillaging. They had a wild side that would make even modern society blush. Forget what you've seen on TV. The real Vikings were much filthier, kinkier, and wilder than Hollywood ever dared to show. Their intimate lives were full of strange rituals, shocking behaviors, and some downright bizarre customs. But why has this part of Viking history been hidden? Why do we ever see these things in popular shows? Stick around because today we are diving deep into the untold, scandalous side of Viking life. You'll be amazed, shocked, and maybe even a little disturbed. But one thing is for sure, you won't look at Vikings the same way again. Let's get started. Introduction to Viking society. When we think of Vikings, we often picture burly warriors covered in blood, charging into battle with axes and swords. While that's partly true, there was so much more to their society. The Vikings lived between the 8th and 11th centuries, traveling from Scandinavia to different parts of Europe and beyond. They were traders, explorers, and settlers. But today, we're not here to talk about their battles. We're here to uncover the juicy details of their personal lives, the things history books barely mention. Unlike the reserved and modest societies of medieval Europe, Viking culture was surprisingly open when it came to sexuality. They had unique customs, shocking habits, and a very different attitude toward pleasure. So let's get into it. 1. The Vikings' love for dirty humor. Believe it or not, Vikings were huge fans of dirty jokes and crude humor. They didn't shy away from talking about bodily functions, sex, and all sorts of things that would be considered inappropriate in modern society. In fact, their poetry often contained insults that were so filthy, they'd make modern-day comedians blush. A famous example is flyting, a kind of verbal battle where Vikings would hurl insults at each other, often making fun of man's sexual performance, questioning his masculinity, or even accusing him of sleeping with animals. These battles weren't just for fun. They were a way to establish dominance. If you lost a flyting match, you lost respect. These verbal duels were so significant that even rulers and noblemen participated, using sharp wit and crude humor to entertain crowds. Some flyting battles got so intense that they led to actual fights, even deadly duels. The Viking love for crude humor wasn't just limited to poetry. Their sagas and everyday conversations were filled with innuendos and double meanings. Unlike many societies that tried to censor such topics, the Vikings embraced it as part of their way of life. 2. Viking hygiene. Cleaner than you think, but also super weird. While Vikings were known for their brutality, they were surprisingly clean, at least compared to other medieval societies. They bathed regularly, brushed their hair, and even used tweezers and ear cleaners. But their cleanliness didn't mean they had modest or reserved habits. In fact, Viking bathhouses were often social, and sometimes even sexual places. Men and women bathed together, and it wasn't uncommon for couples, or even strangers, to get intimate while bathing. Unlike the conservative attitudes of later European societies, Vikings saw nothing wrong with open displays of affection. What's even more surprising is that Viking hygiene wasn't just about attractiveness. It was also about status. A well-groomed, clean Viking was seen as powerful and desirable. Even warriors on long voyages carried grooming kits with them. However, this cleanliness didn't mean they had strict moral codes. Many bathhouses doubled as meeting places for secret lovers, and stories of steamy bathhouse encounters were common in their sagas. Vikings also had unique ways of dealing with bodily functions. While modern toilets were centuries away, they still had designated areas for relieving themselves, and some wealthier Vikings even had primitive indoor latrines. However, their methods for staying fresh were, by modern standards, questionable. Some used animal fats mixed with ash to clean themselves, while others used moss or wool as a primitive form of toilet paper. 3. Polygamy and open relationships. Vikings didn't believe in strict monogamy. Many powerful men had multiple wives or concubines, and relationships were far more flexible than in Christian societies. Viking women had more freedom than most medieval women, and in some cases, they could have lovers outside of marriage. Marriage was often more about alliances and love, but that didn't mean Vikings didn't have passion affairs. There are even stories of Viking leaders having both male and female lovers, something that was completely taboo in later centuries. Viking weddings were often grand affairs with feasts that lasted for days. However, marriages were not necessarily forever. Divorce was relatively easy, and women could leave their husbands if they were mistreated. If a man failed to please his wife in bed, she had the right to leave him, a shocking concept in comparison to the restrictive marriages of other societies at the time. Concubines played an interesting role in Viking society. These women, often captured from raids or given as gifts, were seen as part of a household. While they were not officially wives, they held a respected place in Viking culture. Some concubines gained enough status to become primary wives, proving that Viking society was far more flexible than we might think. 4. The use of magic in love and sex. Vikings believed in magic, and some of their spells were designed to influence love and attraction. Women, in particular, were known to practice seer, a type of magic that could be used to seduce or manipulate others. Some of these spells were meant to make someone fall in love, while others were curses meant to destroy a person's ability to perform in bed. Interestingly, Viking men who practiced this kind of magic were sometimes looked down upon because it was considered more feminine art. It was believed that a man who used love magic was weak, as real men were supposed to win their lovers through strength and charisma alone. Certain herbs and potions were also used in Viking love rituals. Some ingredients were said to increase desire, while others were used to ensure faithfulness. This belief in magic extended beyond simple potions. Some Vikings even tattooed runes onto their bodies, believing these symbols could bring them love, protection, or enhance performance in bed. So, now you know the truth. The Vikings weren't just warriors. They were far more scandalous, wild, and uninhibited than history books and TV shows ever let on. Their world was filled with shocking customs, open-minded relationships, and rituals that might seem downright bizarre today. From their crude humor to their steamy bathhouse encounters, their use of love magic and their wild funerals, the Vikings lived a life that was anything but ordinary. But why don't we ever see this side of Viking life in movies and TV shows? Well, part of the reason is that history often gets cleaned up, romanticized, and rewritten to fit modern narratives. We like to imagine Vikings as noble warriors, fearless adventurers, and savage raiders. But the reality is they were also deeply human, flawed, passionate, and sometimes completely outrageous. What's truly fascinating about Viking culture is how progressive they were in ways that might surprise us. Unlike many medieval societies, they had a much more open approach to gender roles, relationships, and even hygiene. Women had more rights. Divorce was acceptable, and men were expected to maintain their looks and cleanliness. Yet at the same time, they had customs that were brutal, shocking, and, at times, downright disturbing. Their funerals involved human sacrifice. Their warriors took mind-altering substances before battle, and their humor was far filthier than what we hear today. Another reason this side of history isn't widely talked about is because it challenges the traditional image of Vikings. We often see them as these rough, brutal men who only care about conquest, but the truth is, they had a complex society that embraced pleasure, humor, and even the supernatural. Their beliefs in magic, runes, and love spells show how deeply connected they were to their spirituality, even in the most intimate aspects of life. At the end of the day, history is never as simple as it seems. Vikings weren't just warriors. They were traders, explorers, lovers, and in many ways, pioneers of a freer way of life. And while their world was very different from ours, some of their attitudes toward relationships, freedom, and even humor might not be as distant as we think. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real Viking world, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What surprised you the most about Viking life? Let us know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.